Right. So, as I said earlier, um, the in 1775 is when the American Revolution started, and at the beginning, Americans were fighting for what? That's right, outstanding. Their rights as Englishmen. That's kind of sexist right there, but that's what the way it was then. However, this would change by 1776. Now, in 1775, um, delegates from the colonies formed what was known as the Second Continental Congress. And you could say this was sort of the governing body that would manage the war. Okay. So, we're not going to, I know some of you may be interested in military history and that kind of thing, but we don't really get into that a whole lot at all, okay? Simply because it would take way too long and it's a more specialized field. But usually, what I'll do is, kind of like I did in the last lecture, talk about kind of the advantages, overall strategy, advantages and disadvantages, and, basically why the Americans ended up winning were all those advantages that I talked about in the previous lecture. But what I do want to talk about is what happened in 1775. So the war started in April of 1775 to July of 1776 to make Americans move from fighting just for this for full-fledged independence. Well, the first thing was King George III. King George III was the King of England during the American Revolution. He was not what you would say the sharpest tack in the bunch. Some even say he was a few fries short of a Happy Meal, just a little bit off. Um, but nonetheless, at the beginning of the war, it was Parliament that the colonists had a big problem with. It was Parliament that they said was passing these crazy taxes. It was Parliament that passed the intolerable acts or the coercive acts that we talked about. All right, not the king. And so many people weren't, upset with the king. However, it became apparent that the king certainly was not on their side. The Second Continental Congress in August, whoops, of 1775, sent an olive branch petition. You probably heard of that, learned that in high school, to King George III, which he would not even read. He wasn't the best reader in the world anyway. And then he proclaimed the colonies to be in rebellion. And once you did that, that meant that the rebel leaders would be hanged. Second, he concluded a deal in February of 1776 with the princes of the tiny German states of Hesse, Kassel, and Hesse, Hanna. Hesse Kassel and Hesse Hanna. These are little um, fiefdoms, you might think, like little German states in which German princes um, controlled. And what the king did was he used or he paid these princes so that the princes would send troops to fight for the British in America. All right, and these German troops were called Hessians. Okay, because they came from there. I'm not going to ask you this on the test, like the actual um, little fiefdoms here, okay? But I do want you to know that the Hessians were German mercenaries, you might say. I mean, I don't like really using the word mercenaries in this context, actually, because it makes it sound like they were like, really well trained and they did this on their own. I mean, a lot of these guys were just like, some German peasants, working in the field or whatever. And before they knew it, they were on a ship headed to go to America and fight against the Americans. They didn't know any Americans. A lot of them just deserted and went out and, found some country girl out there in the countryside of Pennsylvania and just settled there and had children. And there's people running around that's today that are descendants of these mercenaries, you might say. All right, but anyway, this is something that upset many of Americans because this is the kind of thing that you did when you went to fight when the British were fighting against foreign countries. So it wasn't that made them. They said, well, you're treating us like a foreign country. We might as well act like a foreign country. Um, but anyway, third, George III incited slave rebellions. And this upset people, well, like George Washington, who was a slave owner. Okay, George Washington even wrote to his overseer during the war and told him to make sure all the slaves are working, even the ones that were pretending to be ill and that kind of thing. Okay, so these are all things that Americans felt were kind of drove them over the edge. They felt like they didn't have an ear when it came to the king. The king wasn't going to listen to them. And then a guy by the name of Thomas Paine wrote what was called Common Sense. And this pamphlet sold thousands. And basically, what Thomas Paine said was that it just made sense. It was just common sense that America should be an independent nation. All right, that it made it just made sense. Okay, just like if you look at the solar system. All right, you had the sun. All right, then you have Mercury, Venus, Earth. Okay, we're not going to do Mars and the rest of them. But he said just like the smaller heavenly bodies rotate around the sun, because they're smaller than the sun, the moon rotates around the earth, so should, so does it make any sense for teeny, well, he didn't say teeny, but anyway, tiny Great Britain to somehow control all the 13 colonies? It made 0 sense. All right, made 0 sense. So, it sold about 120,000 copies, and it convinced a lot of people that we should be fighting for independence. He said, in Common Sense, that it was America's, you know, mission to spread republicanism, this idea of representative democracy. Okay. Paine cried, "Freedom hath been hunted around the globe. Asia and Africa hath long expelled her. Europe regards her as a stranger, and England hath given her warning to depart. Oh, rescue the fugitive and prepare in time an asylum for mankind." And of course, when he said asylum, he wasn't talking about a mental asylum, but a refuge for mankind. And so this is what convinced people to actually declare independence from Great Britain. All right? And we will talk about the actual Declaration of Independence, one of my favorite things to talk about in the next lecture, which I'll probably post tomorrow.